Today, I'm absolutely delighted to welcome Rob Etheridge, Global Head of Workforce Strategy and Insights at HSBC, to the Digital HR Leaders podcast. Rob, we've been talking about doing this for ages, so I'm absolutely delighted to welcome you to the show. Let's get started with an introduction to you for our listeners. Give us a little bit about your career history and what brought you into the world of people analytics.
Yeah, thanks, David. It's really good to be with you. I know we've tried for a while and finally things aligned. So happy to be here. Good to speak to you. Thanks for having me on. Yeah, so we have to go right back. I guess as a school leaver, I ventured into the world of accounting. That was my first foray into the corporate world, and I've got to say, I really hated being a trainee accountant, but it wasn't for me, and I ascertained that within a few months, but finished my qualification, but quickly moved into business analysis in the marketing area, actually, in the travel industry. So I was in marketing, and that sort of led me down the path of looking at human behavior and business outcomes, that combination. I found that really fascinating. And ultimately that led me into HR, into reward. I worked as a business partner for a little while, did things like business transformation until in about 2015, I got a tap on the shoulder from the COO at Deutsche Bank, where I was working at the time, to say, hey, there's this thing called people analytics. We think you'd be good for it. And that was I was aware of people analytics before that, and a customer of people analytics, but hadn't considered running it up until that point. But that was the moment where it became real for me.
Great. And you've been at HSBC now for a few years, and you've got it's not just people analytics that you're looking at HSBC, is it, in your remit?
That's right. So people analytics is part of it. But it's coupled up with employee listening, with workforce planning, and also business transformation as well. And that's something that's, currently at HSBC, right at the forefront of everything, is actually how do we transform the business so that it's ready for the future. We have a new CEO, sort of about a year in to his agenda, who's really pushing the business to become simpler, to become more agile, to become more effective, to focus in on what it does well. And of course, all of that has an impact on the workforce, the decisions that are being made around the workforce. So it really shines a spotlight on what we're doing as well. So yes, we've got some of the pieces of HR that you'd expect, being data led, together in the function that I manage as the head of workforce strategy, but I think at the moment a real lens around that transformation piece and how we help the transformation by using those products and capabilities.
That's great. And we're going to basically, for listeners, this is going to be in two parts. We're going to really look at people analytics and Rob's reflections on the field of people analytics and how it's evolved and how he set up his team at HSBC. And then we're going to delve into that second point that you mentioned there, Rob. One of your other responsibilities around the whole business transformation at HSBC and how skills is a big focus, and how you and your team are getting involved in that as well. And we'll finish a little bit by looking at things like AI and the future of work as well. So should be a great conversation, I think, for those listening. You've mentioned you've been in the field for quite some time now, so 10 years. Deutsche Bank and now at HSBC with people analytics amongst your responsibilities. How have you seen HR and people analytics evolve during that time? Maybe both within HSBC, but across the wider industry as well.
Yeah, well, let's go people analytics first. And going back 10 years ago, getting the tap on the shoulder to say, hey, there's this thing called people analytics. Do you feel like setting it up? What was in place at the time were a bunch of disparate HRMI teams. And so I guess my experience, and knowing, obviously there were organizations that were ahead of what we were doing at Deutsche Bank at the time, but really it was about moving from the supply of reporting to supporting decision making from a strategic perspective. That really was the aim of setting up back then at Deutsche Bank. And I guess that's the journey, as I reflect on how things have changed over the last 10 years. It's the strengthening of our ability to be able to then support those strategic decisions. So firstly, the types of question that we get as a people analytics team, I think have changed over time. I think as chief people officers, as other execs around the organization become aware of the capability, it's almost a case of them pulling on it more. And there are then some really large business critical topics and questions that need answering. And so what I see then over time is an evolution of the function to become much more oriented towards those questions. And really the success of the function is based now on, okay, well, how well do you answer those questions? What influence can you have on the strategy of the organization, given the capabilities that are at play? So I think that's the people analytics side of it. And of course, with AI coming and new tooling, what it does is it just strengthens that proposition from a people analytics perspective. So I think we're in an exciting time right now. If we can leverage things like agentic AI, not only so that people analytics people can perhaps be more effective at what they do, but also the delivery of things like insights across an organization. Suddenly we can democratize this, in potentially in a much easier way. So I think developments there, and I think in terms of the construct of these areas as well, as we said before, we've got at HSBC we've moved a few things together that makes sense, as a whole. If you look at a function and think about what we're trying to achieve, then having these different data-oriented teams together in one makes a lot of sense, and I think there's been quite a bit of change there. I would say the change that I see from an HR perspective is slower, honestly. I think with people analytics leading out front in terms of that data-led practice, I think HR is still getting there. I think the conversations that you and I are involved with, well, particularly you, with all the conferences and forums that you're involved with, and some of the ones I'm involved with, people are still at different levels of maturity. And I suppose when we look at the industry at large, we still seem to be talking about how do we become data-led as an HR function or a people function, which I think we're getting to the point where it's really becoming an imperative that people, and the topic of people is also regarded as a data-led topic within organizations. So, yeah, I wish that was going faster. I think it is in pockets. I think where organizations have done it well in the past, they're accelerating away from the pack as well in terms of what they're involved with. The type of role that a chief people officer has. I think we're starting to see combinations of roles at that C-suite level where chief people officers are starting to do other things as well, because the strategy of people and being data-led means you can really integrate that thinking into other areas of the business. But it seems to me like you're either on that track or you're not. So there is this disparity.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're seeing, just echoing what you're saying, Rob, it's an exciting time to be in HR, an exciting time to be in people analytics, probably has been for the last decade. And we've seen HR in many organizations kind of move from that traditional role as a support function to be more of a strategic partner to the business. I think COVID definitely accelerated that. And people analytics is a core capability to help chief people officers to be able to do that. And we've seen people analytics grow and seen it move again from kind of the periphery of HR to the core, and many people like you, peers of you, your remit's increased, the team size is increased, and the impact that you're having is increasing as well. But you're right, and maybe many people listening to this podcast, who work in HR, still as a function, across the function, across all companies. I mean, data literacy in HR is definitely improving, but is it improving quickly enough? Probably not. And I think your kind of hypothesis, as it were, of the leading companies kind of pulling away is something that we're starting to see in the research that we do at Insight 222. And still, when we speak, and thank you, Rob, for being part of the People Analytics program at Insight 222, we still, when we talk to you and your peers, this building data literacy in HR, particularly amongst HR business partners and HR leadership teams sometimes as well, is still a challenge that many of you have. I was going to talk a little bit more some of the other research that we've done at Insight 222. This is around the operating model for people analytics and that kind of that increasing scope of responsibilities that we're seeing, because I think it will bring it to so you can share with listeners how you've designed your team at HSBC. It's still a big conversation around what should be in a people analytics function or what shouldn't. And especially with the emergence of AI, we did an episode a few weeks ago now with Dawn Klinghoffer at Microsoft, and she was talking about how she's reshaping the team because of AI. So I guess the question for you, because I know it's always something people find interesting. Obviously, you've led and scaled people analytics teams now at two companies. How have you set up the people analytics function at HSBC, Rob? And please feel free to comment on any of my ramblings that you just heard as well.
Yeah, no worries. Well, I mean, one thing that just strikes me, and I'll bring an analogy in later on around musical chairs, just around HR being ready to seize the moment. I think there is a real moment right now around the topic of work. And you just mentioned AI and how we're starting to integrate that. I think, there is a moment where we need to sort of seize it as an HR function, because if we don't, I think decisions will start happening without HR. But I know we'll get onto that a bit more later on. But I think also it talks to how people analytics teams are evolving as well. So it's relevant there with AI coming into it. The way we think about it at HSBC and have set up our team is really we've got three products and we've got three capabilities. Now, in reality, we've got more than that, but that's okay. We wanted to sort of keep it simple so that we understood, well, what's the core proposition that we're offering the organization? And how can people understand what we do and navigate that? And therefore make the relationship between us and our stakeholders as effective as possible. So 3 products, actionable insights, product number 1. Now that might take different forms. It could be a piece of research. It could be a dashboard. It could be, accessible MI for managers. But the point and the focus of that product and that product team is, are we producing things that are effective, that are useful? The last thing we want to hear someone say is that's interesting. If it's interesting and that's it, well, then it was no good. It has to be useful. So it's got to go beyond the interesting comment. So, our insights are designed and there is a focus on making sure that people can do something with them. It's the so what question. So product number 1. Product number 2, workforce planning. So, I think we've got this very, very tight combination and relationship between the workforce planning and insights team, with the insights really powering the assumption sets and the approach to workforce planning and providing the input there. Really our focus with that product is providing the organization with a clear path to the future workforce. What does that shape look like? What does the future workforce need to look and feel like and be able to do in order to do the work that's going to make us successful as an organization? Thirdly, then, we've got employee listening, the third of our 3 key products. The idea there being you need clear signals on sentiment. Firstly, to see how the things that HR are doing or the business is doing at large are landing with employees. What's the sentiment around that? But also to ensure there's a dialogue between colleagues and leadership within the bank. So there's a real focus now on ensuring, especially as we've got a new set of leadership within HSBC and the business is transforming, it's been really important to ensure that there's that dialogue going backwards and forwards, and that colleagues at large are feeling like their voice is heard, that there is something two-way going on, where if feedback is provided, then action's happening, or at least conversations are occurring as a result of that. So I think the combination of those three products for us really make up the core proposition of the team. And then what we do is we kind of layer in and matrix in three capabilities from our side of things. And those capabilities are around delivery, and we use Agile to deliver. So everybody in the team is clued up on how we deliver things, the methods that we use, and the way we work with each other. Data science and visualization expertise, and now we can add to that AI expertise. We'll get onto that. But making sure that we've got the technical capabilities across the team that we need in order to deliver those products really well. And then the third one is consulting. So having a layer of consultants in the team and a consulting capability at large that enables us to use critical thinking when we're thinking about problem statements, when we're working with stakeholders to articulate what we're trying to achieve, getting down to the why of why we would do something. And then contracting around how we deliver that back. What does success criteria look like? I think every people analytics leader and team member will tell us that scope creep is a real threat. So being really clear about what you're delivering, why, and when that's been a success is really key. And the consulting capability within the team really helps us with that. So 3 products, 3 capabilities.
No, that's really, really helpful. And I know when you kindly hosted a peer meeting for the members of the People Analytics program, I think it was in 2020, start 2024, wasn't it? God, doesn't time fly? And I think that the way that you and Beck, I think, who leads your consulting function, walk through how you interact with the business was really powerful, and I think it really resonated with those in the room. And maybe if you're able to share some of that with listeners, how does that consulting front end, and maybe the wider team, how do you interact with the business? Not just in HR, but the business as well.
Yeah. Well, the first thing we wanted to create was one entry into the team for our stakeholders. Whilst we've tried to simplify the proposition and explain it in an easy way, that people don't always know where to go or where to come to. They just know that they've got a question or they've got a problem and they need help with it. So what we wanted was somewhat, a set of people within the team whose job it is really to be that front door, so that stakeholders know where to come to in the first instance whenever they've got a question or even just want to perhaps bounce something off someone who knows more about the products than they do. And so having consultants then facing off to each of our key stakeholders has been really great. And that's not a new model, but I think it's part and parcel of being consultative as a team. But then it's allowing those consultants and backing them up, if you like, in terms of being able to manage that relationship effectively. So I would say the combination of us adopting agile methodologies within the team and then having these consultants has been really key. Because what it enables the consultants to say is, well, here's how we're doing things as a team. Here's how we prioritize. Here are, what we have laid out as our priorities for the next quarter and year. If you're coming to me with a question, actually, good news, we're focusing on this already. Here's the stream of work that we've got set up. So it helps the consultant to articulate back to the stakeholder, how we're dealing with work and what we're prioritizing. Now, sometimes it's the other answer. Sometimes it's, okay, interesting question. Can see that there's value in that. It's not currently on the book of work. Help me describe why it should be. And I think by having that mechanism sitting behind the consultants and them knowing that there's something they can fall back on in terms of a kind of reasoned and justified stack of work that's being looked at with clear benefits and value behind it, it allows them to have really good, sometimes challenging conversations with stakeholders. And then it becomes about contracting. It's like, well, actually, you've brought something up that's really worthwhile, really valuable. How do we get that into the book of work? And if it's valuable for you, it's probably valuable for other stakeholders. Actually, if there's a collective of people who think this is more important than some of the things we're doing, great, let's have the conversation. And then we use our agile methodologies to kind of work around that. So I think actually the combination of the two has been really key in making that work.
No, that's really good. And that probably leads nicely onto, I know, one of the really big pillars of work for you at HSBC, and a huge focus for you and the team, is skills. And I've had, your peers on from other organizations, and we've had, companies like TechWolf coming in as well. Everyone says, if you're going to focus on skills, start with the business problem. So why is skills such an important priority for HSBC right now?
Yeah, and I think the first thing to say about skills is there's a massive focus on it, but it's not a new focus necessarily. But the way you can go about solving for the problem has really changed, and that's what's different over the last couple of years, I would say. I think we can go back to the 90s and think about skills-led programs and strategies. So it's been around a while. What's different now, and I think what we found at HSBC, is when you're working at scale, and we have business problems, for example, that we need to solve, like having wealth, expanding our wealth management in Asia. So that has been a key strategic sort of outcome that we've been looking for a while at HSBC, is, well, how do we really grow that business? We know there's huge potential. But actually, with some of the markets we want to operate in, we haven't got enough wealth managers to reach our ambition. And we know that there's not enough wealth managers even in the market to fuel that ambition as well. So what do you do? So there we have a classic business problem that skills can really help with. Because if we can understand what skills we have inside the business and how proximate those are to the skills we need, well, then we can start looking at development, we can look at mobility and the fulfillment side of this, to then fuel and make sure that the workforce, has the right capabilities, is the right shape, is the right size in the areas we need it to be, so that we can get to the business outcomes that we've the ambitions that we've set ourselves. So along the way, over the last few years, there have been these kind of specific business problems that we've been able to get involved with from a skills perspective, and start to use really data-driven, AI-led way of dealing with those. And we've matured over time. It hasn't necessarily been a straightforward or easy journey to start using large language models and AI in terms of understanding the skills we've got. But actually, through putting into practice some of the theory around those use cases, I think we've come a long way. And we're now at a stage where we're saying, well, actually, this is a capability we just need to have. We just need to be able to firstly know what skills we've got in the organization, but secondly, know what skills we need in the future. And that's where TechWolf comes in, as you mentioned before. They've really helped us over the last 2-3 years to formulate not just the way that we get the data, but also how we structure that data, how we put it to use, how we analyze it, how we govern it, which is really important. And so where we've ended up today is we're working on a strategy where, from a workforce planning perspective, we want skills embedded in the way that we think about the workforce. And so we can think about this as bookends. We think about our workforce strategy being one bookend where we've articulated the future shape and capability of the organization. The other bookend then is, do we have the data on our current organization so we know what we can and can't do and what that means for individuals? And then you've got to think, okay, well our plans then should start to bridge this. So getting those bookends in is the first job, really. Where are you going to and where are you coming from? And so we're getting that in place with TechWolf's help. And starting to attach skills both to our employees, but also to our workforce plans. Then we know what we need to bridge. We can start thinking about fulfillment. Is it buy, borrow, etc.? And so we've got two two tracks of activity at the moment. One is about building the foundations out for our skills data and scaling that across the organization to create those bookends. The other is, well, actually, now that we've run some POCs and we've seen this work for areas of our organization, we can start thinking about the fulfillment from a people function perspective. How does our talent acquisition then get involved with starting to fulfill and bridge this gap? What about our development teams? Are we developing the right skills? Are we focusing our development dollars in the right places so that we know the critical skills we need in the future are actually being built out? And therefore providing our employees with a career path, with development, with mobility opportunities as well. So it's an exciting time. And it's really possible because of the introduction of large language models into the picture. We've tried this before as an industry, and it's too unwieldy. But actually, if you can get 80% of the work done, and then add the experts and the humans at the right stage, then that's the key. That starts to make this a sustainable practice that's embedded in the way that we do things.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think, again, from listening to, you and other organizations are kind of at the forefront of this, it's that ability to get that data. Not easy, but it's a lot easier than it used to be when we used to ask people what skills they had, and we had to go through a whole validation process because that data's out of date as soon as you've collected it anyway. Whereas I guess the great thing with using large language models like TechWolf is that information is continually being updated, isn't it?
It is, and I think there's something there about the engagement of our colleagues as well in the topic. I think if you go and ask people to update their skills profiles, no one rushes to do it. Maybe a few people do, but even if you push an organisation to do that, it's usually a one-off process. And to your point, 6 months later, it's out of date. You've got changes in the workforce. You've got people with new skills, skills dropping off, etc. But I think if you can go to your colleagues and say, "Hey, we think you've got these skills," well, suddenly that feels different. Suddenly you want to go, "Oh, do you? What skills do you think I've got?" And so even asking employees to validate their skills profiles in that way, I think, is way more effective, having done 80% of the work. And it might be that they go in there and go, "Actually, I'm not so strong at that, but you've missed this." But that's okay because you've got them to engage with data. And so the only way is up from there. So I think even just that side of it, there's huge value in adopting this way more automated way of doing things. It's not perfect, but it's good enough. And it gets you a long way down the road in terms of them being able to use that data for really important things. And so, for example, for us, one of those important things is our location strategy. If we've got a good handle on our current skill sets and we know what skill sets we need in the future, actually, what does that mean about the markets that we operate in? Where do we put people in different sites? Where do those skills exist today? And so suddenly you having created this core capability, there are a bunch of different use cases that start to come into play. And that's what we're here for, after all. It's to start to influence and help the decision making around those key business priorities.
No, it's great. I mean, clearly it has a direct impact on both business and workforce strategy, which is what we want to be doing as people analytics teams. Obviously, your team's at the fulcrum of this in driving this skills agenda, and as you said, it's kind of been a multi-year journey. What have been some of the breakthrough moments, and maybe what are some of the big challenges that you've had to overcome? I
would call out the first proof of concept that we did in 2024. We'd used skills data before that to, directed at very specific use cases, as I've described before, problem statements that come up around the workforce and business objectives, where you think, okay, here is a use case where we can directly apply it. But we wanted to move away from doing these one-off initiatives to then a more sustainable way of understanding, the future of the workforce and where it needs to be and what we've got right now. And so we ran a proof of concept with a part of our organisation. It's about 2,000 people in the data and analytics part of technology. And we said, well, if you're up for it, what we want to do with you is walk you through this methodology, this approach to skills-led workforce planning, because what it will help you to do is make these key decisions down the road. They were up for it, and I think partnering with them to put this together was key. We learned so much whilst we were doing it. The first thing it validated was that in practice, the data sets that we had around skills were meaningful. Once the business started looking at this stuff in earnest, because they really got it and thought it was going to be useful, then that's when you really start digging away at the data. And we've done validation processes before, but it's different when you're doing it in reality and starting to apply the results. So that was the first great thing, and TechWolf were great in terms of ensuring that we had this great quality of skills data coming in to support that proof of concept. And then what we were able to do was take the workforce plans for that particular area. We worked with the business to turn those workforce plans into job architecture workforce plans. So we understood, at least at a high level, the jobs, the roles that were going to be involved in the future. Of course, we know what we've got right now. And from that, we could extrapolate then using the skills taxonomies that we created with TechWolf, using this core set of data against employees. We could then start seeing for the first time this come to life in terms of, well, what have we got now? What do we need in the future? And it shone a light on things that you just wouldn't expect. For example, it showed us that there were certain skills that we thought were underrepresented that were needed in the future that were actually overrepresented in the employee base. What that did was it helped the business leaders to start looking at other areas to say, well, if that one's okay, and actually we've got too many people with those skills or an overpreponderance of those skills, actually, where do we start directing people? And there were other areas where it was clear to see we only had 60, 50, 40% of what we would need in the future in terms of very specific skills. What we learned was don't look beyond sort of 4 or 5 skills. Know which 4 or 5 skills are really critical to the success of your future business. We've got about 4,000 skills in our taxonomy. And as soon as you start zooming out, it becomes a blur. But by focusing in on those 4 or 5, you can start to say, well, actually, are we over-indexing on one thing and under-indexing on something else? And so for me, that was the first time in our journey where I was like, okay, everything we thought this would be good for is actually true. We can actually start to get insights out of this stuff that are meaningful, and it is going to start having a real impact on the decisions made. Both from a strategic business perspective, great. From a macro point of view, I'm all about strategy. So how do we get there? Cool. But also starting to see it from an employee perspective and a manager perspective, being able to start to say to specific people, actually, if you're interested in this area, we'd love to train you. And this is where it could lead. Being able to have concrete conversations about that, that to me was the first time I could really start to see that coming to life. So yeah, it was a good moment.
Yeah, it's the actionability of these things, isn't it? As you said, it helped fine-tune the workforce, more than fine-tune the workforce plan, help you prioritize the skills that you needed to focus on. And obviously, also there's a benefit for employees as well. I think that's the great thing about companies that are doing skills-based talent management well, is that there's a huge benefit to the business, but there's also a huge benefit to the employees and to leaders as well. And that's why we get into HR in the first place, because we want to make work better for people and help them develop their careers within the organization, but also we want to have an impact on the business as well. And this does both, which is good. And any big, that's a great breakthrough moment, and I can understand why that's giving you the momentum to kind of roll that out and get your stakeholders on board and have impact, which is what we want to do. What have been maybe one or two of the big challenges that you've had to overcome?
If I think about that specific case, the end of that story, it is open-ended. In other words, the question that then came back from the business is, okay, so now we've got these insights and we want to act on them. Can the people function help us? And I suppose that it's really led to what we're doing now, which is the answer to that was no, not really. We can in abstract, but do we have specific methods and ways of then now stepping in and using this data to shape how we help you acquire the right talent, develop the right talent, etc. So I think what it shone a light on was, as a people function, what do we need to do now to enable the business to act on this type of intelligence? So that's the current challenge, is ensuring that we are working in concert as a people function across those different areas to come up with solutions for the business that says, the intelligence is great, actually, what do we do about it? Because businesses can't do it on their own. So ensuring that we have, that we're like-minded across the people function, that we all see the value of that data, of the intelligence, that we can integrate then that into our processes. So one of the things we're working on is a fulfillment playbook. So my team, in conjunction with the talent teams within the people function, okay, how do we know, therefore, when to go and start creating candidate pools against certain types of skill or competency in the market? How do we know which skills we need to understand the proficiency of those skills rather than just the fact that they exist? How do we ensure that actually we're giving people the development opportunities enough in advance before we start looking at the market? And how do we channel people internally through to that? What does that look like from an employee perspective? What does this proposition look like? Is it simple? Is it navigable? So I think those are the challenges for us now. We're busy putting the foundations in place from a data perspective, but it's really, what do you do with that as a people function? And how do you ensure you're ready then to take that to the next step? Because fortunately for us, what we'd said is, well, the POC stops here. We were very clear up front. It's about the data and it's about the intelligence. But very quickly, it shone a light on the work we need to do as a people function then to follow up on that and make sure, to your point, that it's actionable. Otherwise, we're leaving the businesses high and dry with great intelligence, but no way of actually acting.
But again, obviously the promise is that you use that intelligence that you get from the proof of concept and the insights from that, and you want to infuse that across the employee life cycle, I guess, into learning and development, as you said, giving people the opportunity to develop these skills before you go to the outside market. You talked about how it can, it informs your location strategy, which obviously is a huge organization like HSBC is so important because you're in so many markets. So, which locations do we really need to focus on for what skills? Yeah. It's just, I suppose it's the power of this stuff. There's so many actions that you can take on it, both obviously for employees, but also for business decisions as well, as it relates to talent. And I guess that's the power of it, isn't it? You mentioned governance as well and data quality. Sorry, I'll give you a chance to respond to that, Rob.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say, so it's harnessing that power, isn't it? Yeah, it's like, how do you ensure that's not an unwieldy proposition because you've got all this intelligence but you don't know what to do with it? I think that's key. I think you were just about to come onto the governance piece, which I was going to say is that that's the other challenge, is how do you keep this topic simple? Because if you're going to use it to sort of power all of those actions and activities, you need a simple way of talking about it, or a simple enough way that it's actually an effective set of conversations and understandable across all of these different business areas and people functions to do something with it. So I would say that's another challenge for us. Is how do you stay on top of the governance of all of this? As I say, at the moment we've got a taxonomy that has about 4,000 skills in it. And TechWolf have been great in terms of helping us in an automated way organize an ontology of those skills and then turn it into something that's usable, a taxonomy with different levels. And I think that one of the learnings was, don't always talk about individual skills. There's a way of talking about these things sometimes that's helpful at a higher level up that taxonomy. So understand, how do you want to group these things together? What does capability mean to your organization, and where does that come into this? Is it broad topics at the top of this taxonomy? sometimes you need to go all the way down into the detail because it matters, and sometimes you don't. So having a construct that helps you level the conversation appropriately, depending on whether that's a strategic conversation or a data-led one or a piece of analysis or research, I think that's really important. But then how do you scale that across your systems as a people function? So I think that's our next big challenge, is to say, well, if we want employees to interact with this, and we do, and if we want our fulfillment activities to be absolutely linked in with this stuff, then it means our systems also need to be talking this same language. And it's one of the reasons we've gone down the tech wolf route rather than working with a specific vendor, because I think every vendor, or most vendors these days in the HR industry, will tell you, well, we've got a skills taxonomy and we can do some inference and all the rest of it. What we found is actually we don't want to tie ourselves to one vendor in the space, firstly, because we want this common language across all of our different systems and vendors. And secondly, we want an objective view on what the data is actually telling us rather than getting a vendor view on what the data is telling us. So if we construct a taxonomy in a certain way and we can intervene with that and play around with it, it's because we've got a clear view of what we want our future workforce to look like. So how are we articulating that? We want an HSBC flavour of that skills environment rather than a vendor-led one. So that's the thinking. It's not all solved for, and that's currently what we're working through at this stage as well. Okay, how do we distribute the data? How do we make sure we've got a consistent set of language across the space that we can use?
No, and again, I think it just shows that, going down the skills road, it's not easy, it's not simple. The potential benefits can be huge, but this is something that you really need to think about and make sure that actually makes sense for your organization. I guess it clearly, as the way you've articulated it, Rob, it does make sense for HSBC. We're going to move to something now which is quite linked to this, and I know it's a real passion for you. It's how work is changing as well, and I guess that some of the skills data will probably be revealing that. I'd love to hear your thoughts on how you're thinking about the balance between what humans do and what technology is increasingly taking on, and maybe how that's feeding into sort of the workforce planning work that you're doing as well.
Yeah. And I guess the term that comes to mind is future of work, but I feel like we need a new term. So perhaps you could ask your listeners, David, to write in with whatever that new term is, because I think if I say future of work, it takes us back a few years, coming out of COVID, it was the hybrid thing. I think it means something completely different now. And if I look at the workforce planning arena, that traditionally, you used to talk about, the build, the buy, the borrow, and then bot would come, all the B's, and then bot would come somewhere in there, usually at the bottom, is okay, well, what can we automate? I feel like the conversation now needs to be switched into a different order. Because what we have is this huge surge of capability coming into organizations. Now, opinions vary on, well, how much impact is that actually going to have? I think I listened to a podcast the other day where someone was proposing that there'd only be 3 jobs by 2030. And, one of them was a plumber, another one was an electrician. And I don't quite subscribe to that. At the same time, I think everybody agrees. Well,
no, otherwise we better go and retrain.
Exactly. I'll be talking to an AI this time next year, David, I'm afraid. But on the other hand, if we don't think it's going to go that far, and I don't, because actually, businesses and infrastructure and the paradigm of how you do things needs to change, and it's just not going to change that quickly, in my view. But on the other hand, I think we can all agree that AI is having an impact right now, and it's going to continue to have an impact, and that change is just going to speed up. So it's something we've got to think about. And so I feel like rather than saying, okay, well, build, buy, borrow, bot, that bot piece, it comes out of that conversation completely, and it's it's part of the starting point. So now we've got a workforce of humans on one side, and we've got automation, agentic AI, generative AI on this other side. And really the question is, well, how do you combine these two things? Because you know, the agentic and AI side of this is coming and is here. So it can't be one of the last things we think about when we're thinking about workforce strategy. It probably needs to be one of the first things we're thinking about. Well, what is the strategy around leveraging technology to get work done? And how do you create the right symbiotic relationship between that technology and humans so that you're getting the best out of both sides? Because I think the companies and the businesses that are going to be most successful at this, they're going to be playing humans to their strengths, and they're going to be playing technology to its strengths, and ensuring that those two, there's a handshake between the two that works. And unless we start thinking about it like that, we're going to miss opportunities. Certainly from an efficiency perspective, but potentially more seriously from a productivity point of view and an effectiveness perspective. So I think it's fascinating. I think we're at a real shift. And I don't think it's going to put everybody out of work, but I do think it's going to change the nature of the work, and already is changing the nature of the work. If we think of things like vibe coding, where actually the skills that you might have needed 2 or 3 years ago as a technologist, they've completely changed. However, the critical thinking, the design thinking, the way that we audit and govern work, all of these things are actually then emerging as skills that are just human skills that are becoming more and more important. So the way we start to think about these two strategies and merge them, I think is becoming the next big question, and therefore really it's about defining work. I was interested to see, having worked with TechWolf, their research on jobs and the tasks that make up jobs, because really then that becomes the component that you want to have a look at. Is, well, what's the opportunity to start getting machines and bots, technology, AI to take on that work? Where is that opportunity, and how do we help humans embrace that so that they can do the things that they're good at even better? And I think if we start with that question, then we can get into the workforce strategy side piece and do it in that order.
It's almost like, and I've just come out of another B. I haven't really come up with it because I've heard other people mention it before, so I'm not going to claim authorship for it. Blend. How do we blend humans and technology together effectively so we augment them, but it's augmentation, not automation? But yeah, you're right. And I know you've been thinking about this for a while, because and actually for quite a few years as well. As you said, we probably do need a new term for the future of work, although you could argue that there's always a future for work. But yeah, it becomes a bit of a nebulous term at times, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think the term future might be a misnomer as well.
The now of work, yeah.
It's kind of the now of work. I think we're kidding ourselves if we don't think this is a next year problem or a next 3-year problem. It's a now problem. And going back to the conversation we were having before around, well, where's HR at? Where's the people industry at in terms of being able to influence actually the way work is done? I think we've got a narrow window of time as an industry really to sort of claim and start to influence the direction of that. I was talking to someone about it the other day, and the analogy that came to mind was, as kids, you go to a party and you play musical chairs. And, there's not enough chairs for everybody, which creates the anxiety. And you get people hovering over chairs, and, I think we're kind of hovering over a chair as a people function. We've got to keep moving, but if we don't sit on the chair, I think the opportunity might go. I think we might find that technology will sit on that chair instead, or the COO functions within an organisation will sit on that chair. And look, ultimately, this is a combined problem. It's a business problem. But as HR, are we prepared to kind of seize the moment and say, well, actually, we know a lot about work. We know a lot about at least one side of this, which is people. We've got all of the data there. So how do we now seize the moment and work with our other functions within our organizations to come up with a cohesive, coherent strategy around how to start to blend this stuff? Otherwise, we're going to be standing at the edge of the room watching everybody else sat on the chair and administrating it, which would be a real shame given the opportunity that's there right now.
And thanks for the analogy about musical chairs. When you said that, it actually brought back a childhood memory. I think probably for my 5th or 6th birthday, which is a little bit frightening because given I can't remember what happened yesterday half the time. But last couple of questions, Rob. So again, bringing this back maybe to leading a people analytics function, people analytics and workforce planning function. I think let's expand the question. So beyond the technology and the models, what have you learned about leading a people analytics and workforce planning function that really delivers value to the business that maybe you could share with listeners that are maybe in earlier stages of this?
Yeah, I think clarity of vision is absolutely key. And what that vision should do is it should connect the work of the team directly to the key strategic objectives of the organization at large. Firstly, it motivates all of us to do a good job, right? Because actually, if you can see that you're contributing to something, and people analytics really can contribute to the biggest decisions that companies have to make. And if we just think, for most organizations, the biggest overhead for the business is the people. It's usually 60, 70, or even more % of the cost of the organization is wrapped up in managing and paying and ensuring that people can do the best job that they can. So that being the case, being able to ensure that the decisions around that are key, is absolutely a business imperative. And so drawing that line between the work that you're doing and those key business outcomes are key. And that's just from a cost side, let alone productivity or customer service or other key success criteria that the organization may have. All of them can be traced back through people, and therefore people analytics can be absolutely critical in making sure that your organization is successful. And then I think what that does is it helps you ruthlessly prioritize. If you can't draw that line between what you're doing or what you plan to do and some of those really big things, then you're probably working on the wrong stuff. And so when it comes to producing value out of the team, always make sure that there is a link there somewhere to those imperative outcomes. And I think it talks to the nature of working in people analytics at the moment, and I'm sure it's always going to be like this. There's always more work than there are resources. So we're never going to be bored. We're never going to be tapping our fingers because someone always wants something. And usually all of that work has some value attached to it. So the difficulty, and it goes back to the consulting question you asked earlier, the difficulty sometimes is saying no to something that actually you can see value in. But is it as much value as other work that is directly aligned to the overarching business objectives? And, if people can work with you to prove that it is or it isn't, well, that becomes a really good conversation between people analytics functions and their stakeholders. Thinking that critical mindset. Well, why would we do this? What problem are we trying to solve? What outcome are we trying to aim for here? And does that link? Does it help the organization at large? And is it one of those big imperatives? Because if it's not, don't do it. Focus on the other stuff.
That's interesting. You basically brought out at least 3 of the characteristics that we found in leading companies in people analytics through the annual research that we do at Insight 222. One is this ability to influence senior stakeholders within the organization, not just in HR, but obviously CFO, CEO, and others. And that is through, the influence of you as the leader, but also your team as the consulting, where you've set the consulting up. We found that consulting is a key skill of leading companies. And then the other one that you talked about there is that Zen-like focus on the most important business priorities of the organization, prioritizing your work and reprioritizing the work because we know things change as well on the most important business, and that helps you have impact as a people analytics leader and a people analytics team. And as you said, you never, if you're twiddling your fingers in people analytics, then that's when it's really time to worry. So Rob, moving to the final question. This is the question of the series that we're asking every guest in this series of the podcast. And I think it allows you to talk to some of the things that you've maybe already shared, or maybe a couple of things that you haven't. How can HR and people analytics lead the shift towards skills powered workforce planning?
Yeah, it's really of the moment, isn't it? This one, and I guess if I was to summarise where we've been and what we've talked about, recognise there's two parts to this. One is about the data and the foundations, the technical foundations of just having a capability of understanding what skills you've got in the organisation and what skills you need in the future. Now, every people function has a variety of different systems and ways of doing things. That's okay, but actually, it's all about the data. If you get the data piece of this right, it's the foundation for doing all of the rest of it. So that is one track, and I think it's a really important track. And the key there is just to start, not aiming for perfection in the first instance, but just start that journey, because what you'll learn as that data comes together is invaluable, and it will help shape the rest of your journey. So I think that's one track. Then recognize there is another track, and that's the fulfillment piece. So at the same time as you're setting up this foundation, think about what are you going to do with that data and that intelligence on the other side, because very quickly you need to show the value of having invested in this type of data. Leverage AI and large language models. I would say this is impossible without it. You may do a one-off exercise from a skills perspective, a skills planning perspective, but essentially what you'll be doing is resetting each time you do one of those initiatives. If you embed this agenda into AI and LLMs, then what you have is a perpetual way of keeping on top of that data, a perpetual way of governing that data, and then insights that are readily accessible rather than having to start again from scratch, and do an enormous amount of work to come up with actions that may well be out of date by the time you've actually ascertained what it is you need to do. So I think, those are some of the practical things. I think more generally, seize the moment. I think, back. I'm going to take you back to 5-year-old David, at his birthday party or whatever. Feel, there is a bit of anxiety involved in that game, if I remember it as well. I think we should feel a bit of anxiety about it. I think we should be thinking, how on earth do we sit on that chair? Because if we leave it a year or two, my sense is that actually other parts of the organisation will be doing it for us as a people industry. So I think we want to be sat on that chair. We want to be in the conversation. We do not want to be observing it and administering it. We want a view of, well, what does work now look like? It's reconstituted. We have most of the data with us. How do we leverage that now to form a view of what work looks like for our organisations? And that will keep us ahead and abreast of the developments as they come. And it's difficult to know exactly what's going to come, isn't it? But at least if we are exercising that cognitive muscle and in ensuring that we have a capability around skills, we'll be ready to adjust as this AI and agentic and maybe even general AI agenda unfurls over the next decade. We'll make sure we're well positioned.
Great. Well, Rob, it's been fantastic to speak with you, as it always is. I think you provide some really good practical examples of the work that you're doing at HSBC and your thinking around this, which I think is something that always resonates with me when we speak. And I'm sure that listeners will be able to take a lot away from it. Can you share how listeners can follow you and maybe get in touch and learn more about you and the great work that you're doing?
Yeah, thanks, David. So Rob-Etheridge on LinkedIn, I would say that's the best way. I've got a few conferences and forums coming up, which I'll pop on there, where we're talking about exactly this topic around work. Where's it headed? How do we reconstitute it? How do we think about it? What's the strategy? So, yeah, that's definitely where my head's at the moment. I think it's a fascinating topic, and yeah, would welcome connections and links to people who are wondering about the same stuff, and perhaps I'll see you at one of those forums upcoming in the next couple of months. But thanks, David. It's been a pleasure.
In this series, we will be speaking to a range of senior leaders who are pushing a data-driven and digital HR agenda. Make sure that you subscribe via your podcast app of choice and also via our YouTube channel for free and regular interviews with the digital HR leaders of the future.